Hello, Matt.
Hello, Big Daddy.
So I've been gone a couple weeks. Our second daughter, Simone Gray Scher, was born February 11th, 1:40 a.m.
Sloan.
Simone. Middle name Gray, which is French for truth. Vrai. And our first daughter is Elasdi Pax, and her middle name Pax, of course, is Latin for peace, so we have a little bit of a parallel thing going on there. Scher is my wife's last name, Scher is my last name, but not hyphenated. Just Scher being a second middle name for the children.
How's it?
I'm very anti-hyphenation.
How's it spelled?
Scher, Sciarra.
Okay.
So it's actually an Italian name, and Scher is a German name. But they're pronounced similarly.
Now, it's funny, when you think of names, you always have to say, like, well, I like the name Bob, and you're like, no, Bob's that kid that picked his nose in third grade. I can't, I was in school with him, so I can't name it. So, like, Simone, I think of a girl on head of the class. There's a really attractive redheaded girl. I'm trying to get my light. It's darn light. Named Simone on head of the class, and that's who I think of when I hear Simone. I don't know, did that pop into your head too, or?
I'm embarrassed to say that it did not, because I pride myself on my knowledge of 1980 sitcom characters, and I've always generally said that the best way to name your children is with 80 sitcom characters. But of course, I was not the final say on the children's names.
This was Head of the Class, starring Howard Hessman, also Dr. Johnny Fever from WKRP in Cincinnati. For those keeping score at home.
You really could name all your children after WKRP in Cincinnati characters, and you'd be set.
I was just thinking about that show the other day.
Bailey is a great name.
Well, and it's funny.
Herb's a great name. Les is a great name.
Bailey is hotter. And by the way,
a great name.
She's like 60 years old now. It's unbelievable.
Okay.
Bailey is hotter than Jennifer, who was supposed to be the attractive. I think we can.
Well, that's a Rorschach test right there.
Well, maybe. So I feel like you're trying to outdo me. Like you're trying to emasculate me by being a superior
procreator.
You're
being outbreeded by a liberal.
You're a breeder, and so now I'm gonna have to try to up the ante.
I'm pro-contraception. I'm outbreeding you.
Well, I'm pro-contraception. I'm pro-contraception too. We've talked about it. I just don't think. Well, anyway, we won't get into that whole debate.
But I should say that number one, I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
Number two, while I always look disheveled on this show, I'm more disheveled than usual because I want people to see what it looks like. I feel there's way too much pro-parent propaganda out there. It's all a bunch of cult-like recruitment to let people think that's going to be a magical journey from start to finish. People should see how broken people are in the first year.
Well,
up close.
I have a few thoughts on this. First of all, you're going to Ferber, of course.
We Ferbered number one, the Ferber sleep technique, which I swear by. We resisted it for 6 months. We had an absolutely brutal stretch of no sleep. And we finally said, you know what, we just got to, pull the trigger, and bam, one night, kid went down.
Now, are you familiar with swaddling? Have you?
Well, swaddling, as you are a parent know, it comes out of the Happiest Baby on the Block book. And our swaddling skills are greatly improved for child number 2 than child number 1. So I think this child is sleeping better than the first one. But even still, any newborn, no matter how good your swaddling is and your shushing is and all that stuff, the kid just has a tiny stomach. The kid's going to wake up and want to eat all night and doesn't know the difference between night and day.
Now, and it's too early now. I mean, obviously now you sort of have to get up. But I mean, later on you can have night nurses, nannies, au pairs. You guys?
I'm a professional liberal activist, so I don't have those kinds of resources to hire that kind of help.
Well, let me tell you, it takes a village.
Yes, if one had those resources, that is exactly what you should be doing.
It takes a village to raise a child, and in my case, literally a village.
We do have a large. I live in Northampton, Massachusetts, a small, very liberal town, and there's a very nice sense of community here. We have been greatly offered food. We've not cooked for ourselves since the baby has been born, which has been a quite necessary to function.
Yeah.
So we do over that, but but between 8 p.m. and 8 a.m. we were totally on our own.
Man, it's tough. Well, thank you for being able to do this.
I could use the break.
No, I can't
use some social contact.
Well, I can't see you now. People assume we can see each other. I can't see you. Like, for example, the other week when I was ignoring you typing emails, you were unaware of that until someone busted me for that. I can't see you. You say you're disheveled.
Since you can't see me, you can't see that once again I'm holding the phone handset.
Oh.
I don't know if the house was chaos before, it's total chaos. I can't buy anything right now.
I don't ask for much. Bluetooth.
But since I've been gone, your party's presidential race gets more and more interesting.
Yes. Well, maybe. I think it would have actually gotten more interesting if Santorum had won Michigan.
That's true. That made me sad. Yeah. But they're splitting the delegates, so what's the difference?
Well,
they should be calling it a tie.
That's what Santorum is, but, the spin, the immediate spin. And by the way, someone died. I saw that Hagen Goddard tweeted something out about how Michigan just changed the rules to give Romney one additional delegate because he won out. I don't know if that's true. I saw it on Twitter, so I assume it is. But in any event, it was a virtual tie in terms of delegates, but perception is reality, and Romney is perceived to have won. It was close, but I definitely think Romney, and then he also won Arizona that night too. Don't forget. So he clearly is wind is at his back right now.
But people still don't seem to be presuming that he has Super Tuesday locked up. There'll still be a number of states where Romney is not seen as, Tennessee, Georgia.
Ohio's the big fight. That seems like the media is setting Ohio up as if Romney wins Ohio, then he's the guy, and if he loses Ohio,
that seems so arbitrary. Why is Ohio more important than the other states?
Well, I mean, in a general election, Ohio is obviously the bellwether state, so.
But why is the media presuming that a victory in a state in a primary has any bearing how that candidate's going to do in that state in the general?
Right. Well, the other thing too is that Santorum's. I assume they're presuming Santorum is Romney's rival, and Gingrich may have some thoughts about that. But assuming Santorum is the biggest rival of Romney, Ohio would seem to be a state where Santorum would do well, sort of his blue-collar, Rust Belt thing. And also, there's polling that showed that Santorum was up by, I think, double digits. So, but yeah, you're right. I mean, look, this is a media fabrication. They're setting the narrative to say that Ohio is really what matters. And so,
and this happened in 2008 when people said, "Oh, if Obama can't win Pennsylvania, then how is he going to win Pennsylvania in the general? How is he going to win the Rust Belt in the general?"
Right. It's a
and he got Hillary trounced him in Pennsylvania. Obama won the Rust Belt in the general. So we have recent evidence to show that there's no point A to point B.
Right. Well,
as far as primary performance and general election performance.
The press can't be in 10 states, so they have to decide we're all going to go to Cleveland and whatever.
Why can't the press be in 10 states? Are these mom and pop shops? They can't send reporters to more than one state?
They are becoming mom and pop shops, actually. I think that the media fabricates this narrative, and they can't focus on 10 states, or they don't. It's tougher to do that. It's easier to arbitrarily say Ohio is. They could have just as easily said Georgia is the most.
Does math become hard? You sit in your studio, you look at a map. You count the delegates at the end of the night. You say this guy got more. What kind of on-the-ground reporting is even necessary to do that much?
Hey, man, don't hate the player, hate the game.
But when we last talked, I said that I thought that Newt and Santorum were coordinating so they would not overlap much on the campaign trail, and each could effectively be the anti-Romney in different parts of the country. You said that you thought that might happen by coincidence, by their individual campaign strategies, not by direct coordination. Either way, it sure seems like that's what's going on. You're not seeing that much overlap between their schedules. I mean, Gingrich totally took a pass on Michigan and Arizona, and Gingrich is focusing on the southern states on Super Tuesday and afterwards, and Santorum is mostly focusing on Rust Belt, although I do believe Santorum is going into Tennessee, so there's some overlap there. But that's kind of like it's an overlap state geographically. For the most part, they're trying to get out of each other's way, and that does seem to be the best way to slow Romney down and hope that he can accumulate, a critical majority of delegates.
And I still think that you're sort of confusing a causal, or that there's in any event.
Well, I mean, whether it's explicit coordinated or not is sort of beside the point. It's effectively what's going on, it seems.
No, I think that's sort of. I think it is happening that way, but I think part of it's that they have regional appeal. I mean, Santorum seems to be very strong in the Midwest, kind of Rust Belt states, and Gingrich seems to be very strong in the South, Georgia, and potentially Texas going forward if he's still around. And so they're going to, it's in their self-interest to expend their limited resources in places where they think they can win or do well. So I think that's what's driving this.
But so my question to you is, since that does seem to be what's happening on the ground, that they're effectively carving up the map, it does seem to maximize the chances of a split decision on Super Tuesday. Super Tuesday tends to be, it isn't always, but usually someone gets an upper hand on Super Tuesday and gives them if it isn't already wrapped up by that day, gives them the final bit of momentum for wrapping up the race soon thereafter.
Right. Romney's like fighting a two-front war, and I mean, if he puts all of his effort into vanquishing Santorum in Ohio, then he's not going to be concentrating on Georgia as much.
But because he has the money that he can carpet bomb. He can run ads across the country and not worry about going broke. He doesn't have to pick his spots in quite the same way that Newt and Santorum do.
Right.
But it's not.
If Newt and Herman Cain are barnstorming Georgia, spending all their money and time there, and Romney's just spending money there.
Right.
Yeah.
But so it's not inconceivable that Newt picks off some southern states, and Santorum gets Ohio and maybe even one or two others, and maybe Romney picks up the most states. But if there is a media perception that this is a split decision on Super Tuesday, and it's the same kind of unsettled stalemate that this whole race has been so far, does that not? Is that not a precursor or a precondition for ending up with a brokered convention scenario where no one can accumulate the majority of delegates in advance?
I think it totally is, but I think it depends if what the definition of a brokered versus a contested convention is. I've always been of the opinion that it's entirely plausible that they arrive in Tampa without the requisite 1144 delegates, but I don't think that they're going to turn to Jeb Bush or Paul Ryan or somebody else. I think that it would more likely be Mitt Romney finding a way to make Rand Paul or Rick Santorum as vice president in exchange for them instructing delegates to vote for him.
There's this weird thing going on. Politico ran a couple of pieces, I think it was a week ago, before Romney won Michigan and Arizona, quoting a couple of anonymous GOP elder statesmen sketching out brokered convention scenarios, but introducing the term contested convention. So you have this formal memo that apparently has been circulated amongst Republican insiders that doesn't use the word brokered, uses the word contested, and says, brokered convention insinuates that it's being engineered by the party elite, and a contested convention is just the delegates fight it out. And to me, that is just a distinction without a difference. When I talk about brokered convention, I just mean literally if nobody has enough delegates in hand, no one has a majority of delegates in hand before the convention, by definition, a deal has to be brokered at the convention.
Yeah,
that's where the term comes from.
Semantics, but to me, the big distinction is not whether it's party bosses calling the shots or whether it's a more democratic process. It's a matter of whether they look for some white knight to rise.
Right. I mean, you can have a brokered convention that is, the deal is brokered by the Paulites and the Palinites, for all I know. It doesn't necessarily have to be the Jebites and the Christyites. I don't know who's going to broker it, and a brokered convention doesn't automatically mean that a new candidate jumps into the fray. But it does seem to be still in the realm of legitimate possibility that no one can get a majority of delegates in advance.
Oh, yeah.
Depending on how Super Tuesday comes out.
Absolutely possible, and I think it could be very much a split. I don't know. I write this thing. I'm part of a panel for The Guardian that does, after Republican primaries, there's a panel of us that write what we thought of the election. What did I think of Michigan? And I don't know what to do with Super Tuesday because, usually the narrative is pretty obvious. I mean, if Santorum had won Michigan, then I would have said this is chaos in Mitt Romney world. And since Romney won Michigan, that's a different narrative. But I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see because there's so many variables on Super Tuesday.
Well, when you say chaos, I presume that if Santorum had won Michigan, the begging to Jeb and to Christie and to Daniels or maybe somebody else to say someone's got to jump in here, someone's got to meet the filing deadline by late March to get on the ballot in California and New Jersey, and take over this race. And Romney winning Michigan presumably means those panic calls are not happening right now. So even though those are pretty low odds that anyone would jump in this window, since there have been so many repeated denials that no one's going to do that, I presume that's off the table at this point. You're not going to get someone jumping in.
And I actually felt like Michigan really turned out well for Romney. And I'll explain why. If Romney had lost Michigan, it's obvious that would have been chaos. If Romney had won Michigan easy, then I don't think it would have mattered. I think people would have said, well, he was supposed to win Michigan. But his problem is people don't like him, people don't believe in him. And I think that having your back against the wall and then fighting back, there's something endearing about that. And I think about a quarterback, Tony Romo or it's not really your quarterback until he's been tested by fire. And I feel like there's those games where you're down by a couple touchdowns and your quarterback leads you back from that. That's when he becomes the leader of the team. When your back's against the wall and you think you're going to lose and he finds a way to win. So I feel like...
But do you feel like Romney, this is a trial by fire situation where he is manning up for the final drive and he pulls off the perfect pass that no one thought he could? Or is it just that he's continuing to fumble the ball repeatedly and his opposing teams are too stupid to know when to pick the ball up? And so he just gets another chance at it.
I don't know. I mean, I feel like one of the knocks on Romney has been that he's too perfect. And this was not perfect. This was a guy really trying and struggling, but winning narrowly. And I've certainly not been a Romney shill. I think we can agree. But I do think that there's something that was endearing about the win in Michigan, and let's see if he can keep that going.
I mean, he has not had one primary victory where he didn't say something stupid the very next day.
Well,
whether it was I'm not concerned with the very poor, or this week's the flip flop on the contraception amendment.
Well, but that one deserves an asterisk, if you ask me.
You think he legitimately misunderstood the question?
I do. I think he either misunderstood the question or he was trying to dodge the question and came off sounding like he was opposing the Blunt Amendment. But I do not think that he actually was wanted to say that he opposed the Blunt Amendment. And I think it got blown out of proportion very quickly.
Well, even if you give him the benefit of the doubt there, it's still a botch. It's still a mistaken way to handle the question. And you can only there's only so many flubs a candidate can make before, your people start to wonder are you going to have the fortitude to survive, a general election marathon.
Yeah, I kind of give him the benefit of the doubt on that one. I mean, I hear what you're saying. I certainly think that, he's had plenty of gaffes. I mean, the very poor thing was obviously horrible. The two Cadillacs thing, those were issues that, were very damaging because they reinforced a narrative people already feel about him that he doesn't touch. This thing...
This reinforces the flip-flop narrative that he says whatever it takes in the moment to get through the day.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it was as... I feel like this fits into the... I'm trying to get my light to come on for those watching home. I feel like this... It's annoying. We have these lights in my office that they're motion detector lights. And apparently, me sitting here talking to you doesn't tell them that I'm in existence. So they assume that...
You got to do a wave just to keep the lights on every 10 minutes?
I do. What was I saying? It's so distracting.
Romney, give me the benefit of the doubt to Romney.
Right. To me, this was this story would not have been a story 10 years ago. This is a story for people who don't have enough time, or who have too much time on their hands, who have to who have to tweet, who have to blog, who have to, cover 24-hour news cycles. I just think this was I don't think this was really news. I think this is just kind of lame.
But I take your point, but he still hasn't shown an ability to drive a victory and build momentum out of it, to have a string of good news cycles. He always does something to step on himself. And it's making it hard. So even when he does win, even when he does pull the victory out, it doesn't seem to get his own party comfortable with his skills for a general. I mean, and you can look at 2008 as saying, well, that was a protracted race, and Obama was a stronger force. But it's because a lot of negative attacks were thrown at him, and he addressed them head on. To a point where you felt okay, he took care of that. He showed me he knows how to take care of it, and he did it well enough that I'm sure it's not going to come up again going forward. I don't think Romney's at a point where he's actually put things to rest. There's two basic narratives that he's a phony flip-flopper and that he's an out-of-touch Richie Rich. Those are not put to bed. They are very much live, and I don't think I wonder if it's gone too far at this point, that all you can hope for is that, say with Bill Clinton in 92, by the end of the 92 primary process, and I said to you earlier, I just been watching the PBS two-part documentary on Clinton's presidency, which I think you can still watch online, which is pretty, for conservatives who think PBS is a liberal mouthpiece, this was no puff documentary on Clinton. It's pretty harsh. But at the end of that 92 primary process, I mean, the notion that he was a flip-flopping, philandering draft dodger, that was the narrative on him. And he was trailing both Bush and Perot by the end of that primary process and kind of left for dead. And it wasn't that he turned those narratives around, per se. It's just that the economy got hung around Bush's neck, so those things didn't matter. So, Romney could be an out-of-touch Richie Rich who's a flip-flopping phony and still win if people are mad about something else. But I don't know if Romney can actually take those narratives off the table at this point because he's done so much to reinforce them.
And I still think, I mean, I feel like Bill Clinton is an amazing politician too. I mean, I know that you're right that he had problems, but I mean, Bill Clinton is a great natural politician. But
not everybody presumed that in the spring of '92.
No, totally right.
It may be in 2020 when we look back at Mitt Romney as he was a master of the political arts. he had latent skills that no one appreciated at the time.
I'm sorry for laughing. We need to talk about Andrew Breitbart.
We do.
I cannot believe that he passed away. I still.
No, I assume you knew him personally.
Yeah. I cannot believe that it's real. And in fact, a lot of people thought that it wasn't real when the news first
like an Andy Kaufman type of prank.
Like, who knows? Because the guy was 43, and I think because he was so full of life and energy that we thought you couldn't kill him. That he was too alive, that he was the guy, we might need to take a break or a vacation, but he was going to be fighting, you know what I mean? It's hard to believe that it's real.
Now, obviously people are going to say lots of positive things about him, particularly from the conservative side, while people are grieving, and obviously it's a terribly tragic thing for someone to die prematurely. He leaves a wife and kids, and it's horrible, and I totally am deeply saddened for everyone who knows him personally and is in his family.
And by the way, let me just say that liberals have been mostly very classy about this. I've seen David Schuster and many others express their condolences. There's only been one prominent liberal, Matthew Iglesias, who tweeted something that was in very poor taste. But otherwise, it's been quite positive to see the condolences passed along.
So I'm asking these questions strictly in a sincere and respectful way. I'm not trying to dump on him or anything. But to what extent was Breitbart, had he reached a point in the conservative movement where he really was the leader or a leader, or was he still to some extent the bad boy, and not everyone was comfortable with the direction he was taking the movement?
Well, I think both. I don't think there is. We've talked about the leaderless world that we live in. I don't think there's any one person that, if he says something, if E.F. Hutton talks, people listen. I don't think Rush Limbaugh commands that. There is no one person anymore. But I'm going to read something. Is it Lachlan Marquet? I don't know how to pronounce his name, but he's a conservative, a pretty prominent conservative on Twitter. And he wrote something which I think is thought-provoking. He said, Breitbart wasn't the man standing athwart history yelling, "Stop." He was the guy retaking the airplane cockpit from the terrorists. And that struck me as interesting because obviously William F. Buckley famously founded National Review to stand athwart history yelling, "Stop." And Buckley was much more of a traditional journalist, and that's somewhat of a pessimistic conservative worldview, that we're just standing athwart history yelling, "Stop." Breitbart revolutionized things, and sort of a hybrid of journalism and activism, just a very different, if you were to compare him to Buckley, both visionary, both incredibly impactful, but very different generations. I think that, I've seen tweets today, Patricia Heaton is tweeting about him. Rush Limbaugh talked about him. Donald Trump tweeted about Andrew Breitbart today. All three Republican presidential candidates Gingrich, Santorum, and Romney tweeted about Breitbart today. That's pretty amazing, if you ask me.
Now, I'm very fascinated that you brought Buckley, because I was actually thinking of Buckley parallels in my head too. So I think when the eulogizing process is over several months from now, it would probably behoove both conservatives and liberals, anyone who's a professional activist who's interested in getting better, trying to figure out what works and what doesn't, and you're trying to assess somebody's legacy. I think it's going to be productive to take an objective view and ask questions like, is the way Andrew Breitbart played the game, did it help conservatism? Is conservatism better for what Breitbart did than if he was not here? And same way you asked the question about, and Buckley, I think most conservatives say Buckley made conservatism better. Buckley made conservatism a better movement. And a lot of that was how he shaped and refined conservative ideas. And Breitbart was not an ideas guy. He wasn't trying to play the same exact role that Buckley was playing. So it might be worth asking yourself: was the focus that Breitbart had in going after certain enemies like Acorn and Anthony Weiner, was that useful to conservatism? And then from from whether you're a liberal or a conservative activist type, were Breitbart's tactics effective tactics? Sure, he got some scalps, but did it make sense to go after a side organization like Acorn? Was that a useful approach, and should liberals emulate that, or should liberals say, if Obama wins by 8 points in 2012, did kneecapping Acorn make much of a difference? I think those types of questions are worth chewing on over time.
Yeah, well, a couple things. One, I think clearly the highlight of, and by the way, everybody knows in Breitbart, an incredible story. I mean, the work he did for Drudge, the work he did for the Huffington Post, and then, to me, the pinnacle of his career was having Anthony Weiner actually apologize to him. Which I thought was unbelievable. Still can't believe it happened, and the way that Breitbart essentially took over the Weiner press conference. The guy had chutzpah, he had energy, he had passion. There's no doubt about that, whether you like him or not. I think one of the sort of things that Breitbart raised is whether or not conservatives should kind of work with the system. I think Buckley believed that it's sort of like don't hate the player, hate the game. Buckley's idea was I can't reinvent the world, in the sense that, the internet didn't exist. So we can create our own magazine, but it's still a magazine. And we're still going to sort of dress the way that, respectable journalists dress. And they were sort of playing by the mainstream, media's game, but presenting an alternative philosophy. And I think Breitbart would have said, I reject that. We're going to totally reinvent the game. Let's create our own TV network. Let's create our, rather than trying to infiltrate the liberal mainstream media world, he would have said, screw that. Let's invent our own. So I thought that's something interesting about him. Obviously, he was aided by the times in which he lived, by the technology. So, I'll throw it out to you, Bill. Any thoughts on? I could go on about various things, but do you see?
I'd always looked at Breitbart as someone. I did not necessarily see him as a visionary. Maybe we'll be reporting on him that proves me wrong. But it always felt like that there was a pretty well-established conservative media infrastructure that had been put into place over several decades, And yes, there's an internet layer that's been put on alongside of it now. And Breitbart is one of the more successful people at that. But I didn't find that it completely revolutionized conservative media infrastructure. It had already been humming along fairly well.
But no, I'm thinking about the stuff like the James O'Keefe stuff, which Breitbart was part of,
right.
Especially the early stuff, the Planned Parenthood stuff, whereby, look, in the old days, like a James O'Keefe would have tried to get a job like at CBS, and instead they did their own thing, and Breitbart was instrumental in the early days of that. I think here's another question I have, which I think is open to debate. Like, Breitbart was sort of a rock star, sort of a conservative rock star. I mean, he lived in like Hollywood. He's from California. He was certainly not a cookie cutter young Republican. He was manic. He had kind of like long hair and usually a beard, and he was like really into music. And like a lot of rock stars, he died way too young. And sometimes that means that you're sort of become a martyr in a way. That you don't. Now you could argue the conservative movement would have benefited from having Andrew Breitbart around for another 50 years working. And I think most of us would prefer that to have been the case, to have him become, an old statesman. But it sometimes, whether it's Jim Morrison or Elvis, or John Kennedy. I mean, I know these are people who died young for various reasons, and it's hard to compare a blogger to to a president. But you get my point, Bill, which is to say, like, will Andrew Breitbart go down in history as someone who is sort of an iconic figure now? Like, will there be Andrew Breitbart dinners at CPAC or an Andrew Breitbart award given to young journalists every year? Will he become lionized, or will he just be another important, conservative that had an impact?
Well, I could certainly see him lionized on the right, and I could certainly see awards in his name at things like CPAC. I doubt he would have the same kind of historical longevity as William Buckley. I sense that Buckley has put us a bigger stamp on conservatism much more than Breitbart did. And the examples that you mentioned, the James O'Keefe projects are going after these liberal organizations and taking them down with undercover videos and so forth. I think there's a question to ask. That was sort of like the main guerrilla attack in the Obama era, and that was to not go after Obama. It was to go after auxiliary groups that have sort of 6-degree connections at best. Whereas in the Clinton era, the Arkansas Project went after Clinton. They tried to take him down, and came close.
You got
doing that.
You've got Operation Fast and Furious. You've got Solyndra. You've got Light Squared. There are things, but you're talking about Breitbart. You're talking about Breitbart specifically.
Yeah, yeah. He made a strategic choice not to go at the belly of the beast. He made a strategic choice to go after people on the periphery and try to have that sully. Let's defund the left.
Well,
let's take out some of their underpinnings, and that will make the whole house of cards fall down.
You may be right. I would venture to say, despite the fact that it feels like Andrew Breitbart is a household name, but I don't think most people knew who he was 5 years ago. And if you gave him a second term of Barack Obama, who knows what might have happened. It's the second term that Iran-Contra happened. It's the second term that Watergate became an issue. It's usually second terms when scandals really become, an issue. George W. Bush, Katrina, Iraq, all that stuff really, Abu Ghraib. I mean, it really came in. I mean, some of it started in the first administration, but it reached a boiling point in the second. Usually, the second term is when this stuff really, hurts. Am I wrong? Am I wrong about that?
Well, I mean, there are certain situations where, something takes a while to percolate and break through, and therefore that doesn't quite. And sometimes the media kind of holds back. The media kind of held back on Watergate, for example. They didn't really want it to, go overboard with it with limited information before an election day, and the Washington Post felt freer to dig into it afterwards. Other things like Katrina just happened in the second term, and that's just a question.
Right, I mean, Abu Ghraib happened in Bush's first term, but I don't think that it really hurt him. That it really the war weariness caught up to him in the second half of the second.
Right. I mean, clearly, Iraq was the dominant reason why the Republicans lost the Congress in 2006. And then you got, Abu Ghraib was one part of that story.
Bill Clinton obviously, had Whitewater and all that stuff hurting him early on, but clearly it was things that happened in his second term. So,
but the conservative movement was trying to take Clinton down in the first term. It just took them several years to get to a point when they felt they had enough to go on, for impeachment.
I'm just saying.
Maybe they're conservatives that believe that Salinger is that thing and it's going to metastasize in the second term. I don't get a sense there's a lot of reporting out there to give conservatives that much hope that will be the case.
I'm just saying, Andrew was 43, and I think it's like saying, if Eli Manning ended his career tomorrow, I feel like Andrew was in his prime, and given another 3 or 4 years, who knows what he might have accomplished.
But do you think that now that he's gone, that conservatives are not going to do those sorts of things?
I think that there will be people who try to fill his shoes, but he really was a force of nature. I mean, he had incredible energy and passion, and nobody's irreplaceable, and there are a lot of smart people, but I don't think. I haven't met a lot of people like him, so I don't think it's going to be terribly easy.
Well, he definitely seemed to be a unique personality type for the conservative movement.
Yes.
And I imagine that's going to be, not saying it's going to, replicate itself automatically, but the same kind of aggressive approach to a Democratic presidency. I don't think Breitbart started. That was happening under Clinton too, and to a lesser extent under Carter. So that general aggressive approach, I don't think goes away. And I'm sure if someone thinks they got a hint of scandal that they can take Obama down in a presumable second term, they're going to try. But it does seem to me that that Breitbart took the movement in a direction that was designed to not try to take that. Not to say that Breitbart wouldn't have liked to take Obama down. I just think he didn't see the target to go after. And he said, well, if there isn't a clear, obvious target to go after on Obama in his inner circle, let's attack somebody else, as opposed to let's make a case for our ideas. That to me is sort of the bigger question here. Has the Breitbart style made it harder for conservatism to be explained?
I don't think so. I think, I've always believed that the conservative movement needs different types. And there are different roles for people to play. If you think about the heyday, you had Bill Buckley, who was kind of a thinker. You had Ronald Reagan, a politician. You had Paul Weyrich and Phyllis Schlafly, who were activists. You had Bob Novak, a journalist, reporter. I think that's sort of how it needs to be. And I think, maybe instead of saying that Breitbart is, comparing him to Buckley, maybe it's more like he's the 21st century version of Weyrich.
Paul Weyrich, for folks who may not know.
Yeah, I'm just spitballing here. But, he was an activist, but he used 21st century tools to accomplish it. He created this infrastructure of websites. And let me also say about Breitbart, he's a guy who, he and I were very different. Temperamentally, very different in terms of what we did, what we do, but he was very supportive of me. He came on my podcast. I interviewed him when a few months ago, last time I guest hosted the Roger Hedgecock show. Got my book behind me here, The Quotable Rogue. He gave me a blurb for that. So in other words, he didn't say Matt Lewis is a wimp from Washington D.C. and he's not hardcore because he's Andrew was supportive of what I do without sort of assuming that I should be just like him. So I think maybe the Weyrich thing. Maybe it's not.
Weyrich started the Heritage Foundation and the Moral Majority, among other things. Those are institutions that were about trying to promote conservative ideas. I don't see Breitbart getting behind things like that.
It's an interesting question.
Breitbart's main driving motivation seemed to be to prove that liberals were evil people.
Well, I would say this, and maybe some may say it's splitting hairs. I think that Breitbart's message was against media bias, liberal bias in the media, which I think is very real, and exposing hypocrisy, which I think is very real. That he was utterly passionate about that, and it's a huge problem. And that is that the same as writing about healthcare reform or the need for income inequality? No, but
I'm not saying someone could argue very passionately that what Breitbart was doing was the right thing for conservatism to be doing in that given moment. That to have go after the enemy was the right strategic choice.
Well, I would say again. I would go back to my point about a movement needs different team players. If everybody was at the Heritage Foundation or the American Enterprise Institute writing white papers, then the right would be utterly destroyed electorally. You need
offense and defense.
Yeah.
You need highbrow and lowbrow.
Exactly. You need different position players.
But I do think it's worth conservatives asking themselves, and for liberals to look at the other side and see what works for what doesn't work for them. With Breitbart as one of the dominant figures in the movement, was the conservative movement striking that right balance? Were they doing both things, or had they gone too far in one direction and lost the white paper side?
Right. It's interesting. I just interviewed Stephen Hayward, who's actually works at the American Enterprise Institute, and he's a very smart guy. And he wrote a piece in the Washington Post a couple years ago, decrying sort of how the Tea Party had maybe in some ways negatively impacted the debate. And he was pointing out, this is 2 years ago, look at the best-selling books. It's Glenn Beck, it's Ann Coulter. The right used to produce very thought-provoking books and Buckley and all that, and now we've got Glenn Beck, is our hero. And I just interviewed him again for my podcast last week, and he said, well, look, Charles Murray's book is big right now. And whether or not you agree with Charles Murray, it's a tome. It's an intellectual, sociological study. And that's the kind of books that conservatives used to churn out, kind of intellectual. So, I think that...
And are you seeing conservative politicians take the ideas in Murray's book and have that inform their bills, their rhetoric, or is it just sort of like standing alone on its own separate island?
I mean, I think the book's still new. I haven't even read it yet. It's still fairly new, but I think that the topics are fascinating. You know what? It's in a way, combining sociology with politics and looking at how, for example, like does Murray's kind of famous for like the sort of Daniel Patrick Moynihan stuff. Like, does welfare actually cause more problems or hurt the people it's supposed to help, and how does it impact society, and so questions like that. So I mean, I think it's now my other light went out. So I think it's very healthy to have the debates. Well, not you agree with everything he's saying. I mean, it's thought provoking. I mean, like I really like Andrew Sullivan's blog a lot, and I read it. A lot of conservatives really don't like Andrew Sullivan, and he's certainly written and said things that I don't like. But he is very interested in these sort of topics, and again, I mean, coming back to Breitbart, I think he played a very important, very key role. And in some ways, he was like a warrior. Like, he was fighting people on Twitter, so I don't have to. And I don't know if that put him in an early grave or not.
Well, I think you're part of the problem, Matt. Here you are being nice to me.
Yeah,
You should be tearing me apart.
What else was I going to say about Andrew? Oh, I mean, I would just say, you talked about what can conservatives or liberals learn from him. I mean, to me, it's, I'll be thinking about what can I learn from this all, and what is it about him that I should try to replicate or copy, and what should I not try to replicate or copy? What, in some cases, because it maybe didn't work, in some cases because it just wouldn't. Gosh, now I'm in complete darkness, Bill. Hang on. Like utter darkness. All my lights have gone off. So anyway, I think it's healthy to examine and to think about someone's legacy and work. But I think at the end of the day, the conservative movement is much richer for having him.
And do you think he is going to inspire others to follow his path?
I think there's a chance that he could become he wouldn't like this. The Che Guevara T-shirts that kids wear? Those T-shirts. Somebody should make a Viva Breitbart T-shirt like that. And because I think that he could become a conservative, iconic, revolutionary figure. Or not. But there's potential.
Very interesting. It's always sad to talk about someone's premature passing, but hopefully we were able to shed some light on
and he was
on his legacy.
I mean, no matter what you think about his politics, he was a hell of a guy. Always nice. And, I mean, I think that if people met him in person, and this might be true of people on the left and the right. I mean, some people were jerks and some people were cool. And he's one of the kind of people, if you met him in person, you'd like him. I was talking to someone today who told me when Michelle Malkin comes to town, she's very nice and very polite, but she usually goes up to her hotel room before she speaks and sort of relaxes and then comes down and gives a great speech. Breitbart goes to the bar and sits at the bar and drinks and talks to everyone who comes through. And then goes out on tours with them around the community. Where he just like hangs out with people. And probably doesn't sleep. I keep talking about it in the present tense because it's like literally unbelievable. So anyway, he was a great guy, no matter how you feel about politics. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of conversation and debate about that in the coming days.
Despite the sad topic, always good to talk to you, Matt.
Yeah, buddy.
Sorry to be away from you for so long.
I know it's been painful. Thank you to Chris Moody and Bob Costa who filled in for you while you were out. It was good talking to them, but good to have you back.
Good chaps, both.
Good guys, and congratulations again to you, Bill.
Thank you.
For your new baby.
Now ball's in your court. You got to catch up.
Well, I'm gonna have to get to work on that. So.
And hopefully next week we will decide on a new show name.
We need a name. So this is your last chance, folks. Chime off. Put it in the comments, or you can tweet us at The Weekend Blog on Twitter.
While it's still there.
While it's there. I think you know what we can do. We can keep it. We'll just change the name.
Yeah.
We won't lose our followers. So.
All 20 followers.
I think we're close to 100 now, Bill.
Oh,
You're underestimating. We might be over 100 by now.
That's not too shabby.
It's not shabby considering we've never done anything to try to promote it. Really, we've never. We haven't overtly tried to build a following. So 100 people's not done that.
Okay. Well, till next week, Matt.
Until next week, I'm Matt Lewis.
I'm Bill Scher.
And you're watching.
Something or other.
All right. Thanks, Bill.